Hey everybody, another doozy for you. George Papadopoulos, man at the heart of the Trump-Russia saga. Had a long and I think extremely illuminating discussion. He just has had a book out. It's called Deep State Target. I've read it. If this is a story that you've been immersed in, then I would recommend reading the book. Um, it's not a work of Shakespeare per se, but it does lay out the facts as he sees them, and I found it quite edifying. So let's get into it.
Okay, I am with George Papadopoulos. Hello, George.
Hello, thank you.
So you are on a book tour or a publicity tour.
Yes, I am.
And what's that experience been like? And we just talked about talked about it a little bit off air, but not everybody experiences something like that. So what's been your impression?
Well, that's a great question, and thanks a lot for having me. I never thought in a million years I would have been writing a book about the deep state, but here we are in April of 2019, talking about my book, which is titled Deep State Target: How I Got Caught in the Crosshairs of the Plot to Bring Down President Trump. And, I have received overwhelming positive responses from actually both the liberals and the conservatives. And I'm very happy about that for one reason and one reason only. My book is not a pro-Trump book. It's not supposed to be viewed through partisan lens. It's supposed to expose the truth and fill in the gaps that have been made over the past 2 years that were filled with innuendo, falsities, and mischaracterizations and misrepresentations about who George Papadopoulos is as a professional, first, and secondly, his involvement in the Russia probe and what his involvement will likely be moving forward as the new investigations open up regarding FISA abuse and the origins of the Mueller probe. So it's quite fascinating. Many people, had known me as, I don't know, some coffee guy or whatever. But then when they read my book, they're quite shocked. And that was actually the effect that I wanted on people when they read my book, because I wanted new questions to be raised. And I wanted people to actually look into this with a new perspective and find out how we got here. And that's, 2 years after the probe started.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring up the point about this not having any kind of simple partisan objective or even a framing of that sort, because one thing that's been so frustrating to me as somebody who's never been a pro-Trump partisan or a Trump booster is that throughout this entire ordeal, when you raise questions or criticisms about the conduct of the FBI and the CIA and other kind of facets of this intelligence community nexus, in the current, political rancor and discourse, that often gets immediately spun as somehow defending Trump, as if imposing oversight on the FBI and CIA is like inherently pro-Trump somehow. I mean, the reasoning there is never really spelled out, but anyway, that's sort of the vantage point from which I read your book. So any reaction to that?
Look, if what I'm discussing in my book happened at the behest of the Trump administration on, for example, Bernie Sanders' campaign, Kamala Harris's campaign, or anybody's campaign, which was an opposition party campaign, like we're going to be going into 2020 with, you would see me on TV on both MSNBC and Fox News hitting the gavel, screaming my lungs out of why this was unethical, illegal, and should not be tolerated in this country. And what my book fully exposes with firsthand experiences and accounts is a spying scandal, which both the Obama administration and foreign governments were colluding and complicit in. So this shouldn't be viewed as a partisan issue, because this shouldn't happen in America first and foremost, and it shouldn't ever happen again to affect the democratic process in this country, whether we like a candidate or we don't, because many people might not like Kamala Harris or Bernie Sanders, but that doesn't mean that you weaponize the CIA and the FBI and the UK and Australia and other governments against them to assure that they lose or that they look bad. And that's actually what happened. And, that's what my book is all about.
Right. So let's get into it. But first, just to clarify your role in the Trump campaign, because there was some misinformation about this when your guilty plea was unsealed in October of 2017. Trump, associates like this guy, Michael Caputo, said you were a coffee boy.
Yeah.
Even Trump himself put out a tweet saying, "Oh, this was just some low-level. George was such a low-level volunteer who few knew," something to that effect.
Yeah.
But in reality, you had a pretty prominent role in numerous respects. You helped draft his forced foreign policy address during the Republican primaries.
Yes.
And later, you even helped to facilitate his first meeting with a foreign leader, right, as Republican nominee, which was Sisi of Egypt.
Yes.
So how does that comport with the characterization of you as this kind of low-level nobody that ended up being predominant within the Trump camp in terms of how they described you?
Well, first and foremost, Michael Caputo, as you referenced, was the person who called me this coffee boy. Michael Caputo was hired and fired within 1 month of joining the campaign in actually a very hysterical manner. And I think he was fired in April of 2016, just at the time when I joined the campaign. So, of course, it was impossible for him to have known what I was doing on the campaign and how involved I was and who I was dealing with. So he's actually apologized, numerous times, and I've accepted it. And, I've even spoken on TV with him about this particular issue, and actually he's been promoting my book. So I guess fate works in a very funny way. So I've accepted his apology, but that's not the point. And secondly, about Donald Trump, look, the way my status of offense was written with such innuendo and, false information that I was some guy dealing with Russian spies and Vladimir Putin's niece about hacked emails. If I was Donald Trump, I'd be distancing myself from this guy too. So, and of course, it was the first guilty plea. It rocked the world. It was the same day that Manafort and Gates were indicted. So all hell was breaking loose that day for the president. And, just people didn't understand what was going on. And secondly, I hadn't been in touch with my colleagues for about probably 11 months at that point. I was enjoying my life in Europe with my then girlfriend. I was actually planning on joining Fox News as a contributor. So I wasn't in touch with Steve Bannon or any of these people I was working with. So when my name went public, it had been, close to a year by the time I had really been in touch with anyone. And, so a combination of all those factors, one, I have nothing against what the president said, and two, what Michael Caputo did. I think the story just needed to be, the record had to be set straight, and I think that's what's happening now.
But the point is, you weren't some low-level, functionary. You were somebody who actually was given a somewhat prominent position despite your young age at the time. And I mean, you were in your 20s, and the people you were dealing with were mostly decades older.
Well, I mean, you gave some good examples, and I did help facilitate I did facilitate the meeting between President Sisi and Trump at the UN General Assembly. In my book, I explained what a long process that was and how many intermediaries it took to actually facilitate that very difficult meeting to happen. I did co-author his first speech along with Stephen Miller. I was a formal campaign surrogate, which I had been authorized to go on TV. I just decided never to go on TV to represent the candidates. I was the only campaign official who gave an interview to the Russian media, which many people don't understand. after Hope Hicks and Brian Lanza told me to do it. So, look, I played a role. It was behind the scenes kind of role. That's how I liked it. I was relatively younger. I didn't want to expose myself that much just in case he didn't win. And, maybe I should have gone on TV when people like Boris Epstein were telling me to go on. And maybe we wouldn't have had this this bizarre misrepresentation of my involvement in the campaign for 2 years, but it's okay.
Well, I guess the word that they use to kind of downplay your involvement is volunteer, because technically you were not financially compensated, whereas in your previous role in the Ben Carson campaign, you were compensated. But others in the campaign, as you note in the book, like Bannon, or correct me if I'm wrong, would have been volunteers as well per that metric.
Well, no one was paid. I remember I was having even a talk with Boris Epstein over breakfast. Which I think Boris Epstein was I think he was the head of surrogates at the time. I can't remember. I know he's with St. Clair now. But Boris and I were having breakfast in Manhattan in the fall of 2016. I remember he was like, "Are they paying you?" And I said, "No." He's like, "Well, they're not paying me either." So we were both kind of like, "Well, hopefully all this work we put into this leads to something," because no one was getting paid. And I think, that wasn't the priority, quite frankly. I certainly was happy to work for free because it was obviously towards the goal of Trump becoming president. And if I could contribute anything to that, then that's what made me content with my contribution, not necessarily getting $5,000 or $10,000 a month.
Right. Okay, so let's go into the timeline here, which I know you've probably rehearsed on countless occasions at this point, but nonetheless, a lot of this saga, at least from your end, revolves around this mysterious Professor Mifsud.
Yes.
Who is just he's a figure throughout the book. He's somebody whose motives you're puzzling over constantly. And it almost takes on like a darkly humorous dimension, frankly.
It does. And I wanted that to come across because this is a lot of cloak and daggers kind of stuff. And like you said, he remains an enigma to this day,
right.
And no one could track him down. But I've been told recently he's not dead, so there's some improvements.
Right. We should say, I mean, he was rumored to have been deceased at a certain point. Right?
That's right.
But now it appears he might be living under an assumed name somewhere, but nobody's heard from him in quite a while.
Well, the only in public statements that he's made were two. One, he gave an interview, a bizarre interview, to the Italian media the day my name was released. And he said he's never heard of Putin's niece, and George is probably talking about some girl that he was trying to have a romantic relationship with. And we could get into that aspect of my relationship with Joseph Mifsud. And also his lawyer, this man named Stephen Rowe, who's a prominent Swiss attorney, has gone public numerous times and stated that Joseph Mifsud was no Russian asset, but he was a Western intelligence operative, and he was working under the guidance of the FBI when he was interacting with Papadopoulos. He said this on CNN during a 1 hour short documentary that CNN had about my life. And he's given interviews subsequently to the Daily Caller, where he suggested the same exact thing. Now, anybody who's been following my case and who could just simply Google Joseph Mifsud can also see that Joseph Mifsud, of course, was dealing with MI6 figures at the highest level. 3 months after I notified the FBI that he could be potentially a Russian asset, he was in Saudi Arabia on a panel with Ash Carter, who was the former defense secretary under Obama. And around the time where my name was released in October of 2017, he was photographed in The Guardian attending private parties with Boris Johnson, who just happened to be the Secretary of State of the UK. So unless the Russians basically infiltrated the upper echelons of the US and UK security establishment, then Mifsud was no Russian agent. And he's, in my opinion, and what everybody now who's objective believes, is that he was actually an operative working on behalf of the West to basically entrap me with this unsolicited information regarding Hillary Clinton and her emails. And that's why he's gone underground, and he's living somewhere in Italy, I've been told, and he's actually on the payroll of Italian intelligence. That's what I've been told recently. So it's a very bizarre story, but I can try and go step by step and explain my entire encounters with him and what we know now about him.
Well, you say in the book that you believe he's either CIA or MI6, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So you think he has a specific affiliation with one of two intelligence agencies, which maybe have some overlap, but...
Well, let's look at the facts, okay? Because this is all about the facts now. Because I finally have a chance to talk about my story and what this is all about, right? So I was working in London at an organization called the London Center for International Law Practice. And I had a stint there where I was basically trying to figure out if I wanted to remain in Europe or go back to the U.S. and get involved in presidential politics. And at this organization, there were a lot of these CIA types, MI6 types, former Western diplomats, former Western intelligence officials, people connected to the FBI, were all directors of this group, and of course, extremely high-level and prominent attorneys at the top law firms in the world were affiliated with this group, which anybody could simply Google and do your own research on. It was at this organization in March of 2016 that I notified I am going to be leaving you and joining the Trump campaign. And all of a sudden, alarm bells started ringing. As I explained in my book, there was a paranoia about me joining Trump and why it was a bad idea.
And just to interject really quickly, you had been propositioning Corey Lewandowski in terms of gaining some kind of advisory role with the campaign for months prior to that.
Oh, that's a great point. So I had actually reached out to Corey Lewandowski, I think 3 days after Donald Trump announced his candidacy, which I think was June or July of 2015.
June 2015.
Yes, and I messaged Corey on LinkedIn, and I said, "Hi, Corey. My name is George. This is my background, and I'd like to get involved with your campaign." And he responded to me that he liked my background, and we should be in touch. This was at a time when the campaign was 3 people. It was Trump, Corey Lewandowski, and Hope Hicks, I think, and no one else. I think Sam Nunberg was like a senior advisor at that point, so you could understand like how
Keith Schiller technically is just like the body guy.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Okay, so it was a very bare bones apparatus at that point, and I describe it in my book as I viewed Trump as a stock, where I had to basically buy very low because if I didn't jump in at the bottom, it'd be very hard as a 28-year-old to join what I thought was going to be the next president's campaign. I don't know why I predicted it. I just did that way. I actually thought that Trump was going to win, and he'd have chosen Marco Rubio as his VP. And that was the logic behind my why I reached out. But anyway, we kept in touch, as you explained, over the next 8 months. I ended up joining Ben Carson's campaign for 4 months until he drops out. And then I joined Trump's campaign officially in mid-March. But then by the time I joined Trump's campaign, I'm in London. I'm working at this organization. I'm also a private energy consultant. And this woman, who actually is a very, very important person, and I've just discovered how important she is because she actually plays into the Bruce Orr story, but I could explain that in a little bit. Her name is Arvinder Sambe. And as I'm explaining to these people at this organization that I'm going to be leaving and joining the Trump campaign, she tells me, horrified, basically, before you go, you should go to Rome, and we have some people there who are going to help you on the Trump campaign. And I say, that's great. I didn't understand that this person was actually the FBI legal attaché in the UK and that she had a personal working relationship with Bob Mueller dating back to 9/11. I did not know this at the time. I just recently learned this. And so I say, okay, I'll go to Rome. And I go to Rome on a business trip to a place called Link Campus, which David Ignatius of the Washington Post has written extensively about. And this school is a CIA FBI training ground in Rome. And it's at this university where I'm introduced to Joseph Mifsud, who was the person that Arvinder Sambe said I needed to meet because he was going to help me on the Trump campaign. So so everybody listening to this, an FBI intermediary who had worked with Bob Mueller in the past connects me to Joseph Mifsud at a school that trains the CIA and FBI. That was how the connection was made initially.
Right. And what is your initial impression of Mifsud? Is it sort of unremarkable? I mean, you describe it a little bit in the book, but just upon first glance, what is in your mind?
I'm basically handed off to Mifsud. I like to call it like that. I was handed off to Mifsud by Naji Idris, who was a director at the company I used to work for in London. And he says, this is the guy you need to talk now. And I see Mifsud, and he presents himself as a mid-50s former diplomat who's connected all around the world. I remember he was telling me that, the Vietnamese president was a good friend of his. He was connected at the State Department with the socialists in Europe, Clinton, Russia, London, Brussels. I mean, Rome. This was a man of the world, essentially, right? And I said, okay, this is interesting. And, then we go to dinner, and he starts profiling me. He basically starts asking me about, what I think about Russia, what my religion is, if I'm a Greek Orthodox guy, if I sympathize with the Serbians who were bombed in Kosovo. I mean, it was becoming very, it was like a profiling almost to see if I had some sort of sympathy towards Russia and the greater Orthodox community, which many people don't understand. But the Greek Orthodox Church and the Russian Orthodox Church are very close. They're almost like cousins. And I'm not a religious person myself, so I felt it was a very bizarre set of questions to be asking somebody you just met. But anyways, we continued our conversation, and I asked him, who he can introduce me to. He said, I can introduce you to many people, and I'm going to help you introduce Trump to Putin. And, initially I thought that was a wonderful idea because, of course, there's nothing illegal about a candidate for going on a foreign policy trip and meeting various leaders.
And let's just clarify, at that time, this was prior to Trump-Russia becoming a nationwide frenzy, right? So it was understood that part of Trump's foreign policy platform was improved relations with Russia, and he was sort of heterodox in terms of the prevailing Republican view.
Yes, exactly.
So
this is March 2016.
Right. So this wasn't like a nefarious thing at the time.
Oh, no, absolutely not. This was basically 4 months after Donald Trump was going public saying we need to work with Russia and Putin's a good leader. Okay, remember, that was the extent of Donald Trump's knowledge on foreign affairs, right? And we need to work with Russia. We need to beat ISIS, and China's killing us in trade. Remember that? That was what Donald Trump's campaign was all about before I joined.
Yeah, he would say, let Russia bomb ISIS. Why do we have to always do everything?
Exactly. So this was all very public. I mean, Donald Trump, my boss, and I'm a foreign policy advisor, he's talking about working with Russia at the geopolitical level. So what better way to contribute to the campaign besides obviously leveraging my high-level connections I had in Egypt, Cyprus, Greece, and Israel, in that part of the world, than by seeing what this guy, Joseph Mifsud, could produce. And that was a potential summit, which I thought would be a great photo op of, Trump meeting Putin and other leaders in Europe. Okay. So I leave Rome feeling, pretty good that this guy might be the real deal. And I get back to London the next week, and I'm in my office at the London Center for International Law Practice. And Naji Idris, one of the directors, tells me, you need to go meet Mifsud. Remember, you met him last week. And I said, why do I have to meet Mifsud? Well, he's introducing you to a very high-level Russian. And I said, who is this high-level Russian? He says, you're going to be meeting the niece of Vladimir Putin. And I said, wow, that's pretty incredible. One, it's incredible because looking back, it's bizarre that a director from the company I was working for, which had connections to the MI6 and FBI, would be in on this scam. And two, why Joseph Mifsud would introduce me to a young lady, a beautiful young lady, who he called the niece of Vladimir Putin. And then in his only public interview he ever gave, he completely dismissed the idea that he ever introduced me to anybody. So I
And
go
as far
to
as we
meet,
know, Vladimir Putin has no niece.
as far as we know, Vladimir Putin is an only child, so
Right.
it's impossible for him to have a niece. And to this day, I don't know who this person was that I met, and it's one of the key mysteries of this entire saga.
Right. So yeah, just continue with the timeline there.
Sure. So anyway, Naji tells me, "Hey George, go meet Putin's niece," and I'm ecstatic. I'm like, wow, because I had been scheduled to go to Israel later that month to give a high level talk at an energy conference along with Ernest Moniz, who was the U.S. Energy Secretary at the time. So I was thinking, my goodness, I'm going to go to Israel. I'm going to go leverage those talk connections. I'm going to make the campaign look good. Now I'm going to be meeting Vladimir Putin's niece. I'm at the top of the world, okay? And I get to this meeting, and this young lady doesn't speak English. She's smiling. Mifsud is basically chaperoning her around and saying that she's going to be a high-level source for you with the Russian government, and we're all going to be a great team. And, she's going to introduce you to the ambassador of Russia and to the foreign minister. And I said, that's incredible. So I foolishly, or I should say not foolishly, but I rapidly emailed the campaign. And I told them, hey, guys, I just met Vladimir Putin's niece. And they're going to be introducing me to the Russian ambassador, and everything's going great. And
shouldn't you have Googled at that point, does Vladimir Putin have a niece or something along those lines?
Well, you know what it was? It was because I thought she had been vetted by the company I was working for, or
Right.
I thought the whole thing was vetted, okay? I would have never met Joseph Mifsud again in my life if he wasn't purportedly vetted by the directors of the company I was working for. And they told me, go, go, go. And the hotel, the Holborn Hotel, was basically right across the street from my company. So they said, you better go quickly and meet this person. So I went. And of course, in retrospect, I should have done my own research. But, your life is moving so fast at that time that, you're about to join the hottest campaign in the world. You're not really, you understand in retrospect, of course, you could always say you should have done your own research, but I was just kind of in a rush to make things happen. And I go there and, okay, I meet this person, and then Mifsud basically says, now let's keep in touch. And I tell Mifsud, I want to meet the Russian ambassador in London. And he says, don't worry, Putin's niece and me are going to get you in that contact. And they never did. All of a sudden, this Putin's niece person, whoever that was, goes from an individual who does not speak English to writing fluent English in emails to me, describing herself as an intermediary between myself, the campaign, and the Kremlin, and that, quote, her high-level contacts at the Russian embassy are fully aware of who I am and cannot wait to meet me. So I was playing along. I said, okay, that's great. So when am I going to meet these people? 2 weeks pass, no meetings. 3 weeks pass, no meetings. And all of a sudden, I'm starting to get a little suspicious. And by that time, the campaign had been oscillating between cold and lukewarm on whether we should even have a foreign policy trip. Some people in the campaign were open to it, others weren't. So
you propose this trip at this meeting that is photographed, which has
Yes.
you seated at a table with Jeff Sessions and Trump and others. And it seems as though when you express, your belief in the utility of this trip, Sessions seems to acknowledge it favorably, and even Trump gives sort of like a non-committal acknowledgement. And this became a bone of contention later as well, right? Because Sessions insisted that he pushed back on the notion, or it seems like there was like a rewriting of history in terms of how that proposal was received, right?
Okay, I'm going to put you and the listeners in the room of that March 31st meeting. I'm at a round table where I am so confident that the campaign wants this meeting because I had been emailing them from London for 2 weeks leading up to this meeting about me meeting with Putin's niece and all these Russian intermediaries who are going to make great things happen. And Sam Clovis and others were enthusiastic. They were saying, good work, keep it up, let's see what happens. So I get to the meeting with Trump and Sessions, and I'm very confident. I'm not simply a 28-year-old in there shy. I'm about to make things happen. And I tell Trump, to his face that I'm going to introduce you to Vladimir Putin through a contact I have in London. And Trump looks at me, nods. He's, not committed either way, and he defers to who was then the most senior person in the entire campaign and a sitting senator, and that was Jeff Sessions. And Jeff Sessions was very enthusiastic, to the point where he says, this is a good idea, let's look into it. And after that comment, I was so emboldened that I actually personally gave Jeff Sessions my business card. And Stephen Miller, who then was an obscure junior aide, but now he's obviously a senior White House advisor.
An aide to Sessions.
Yes, an aide to Sessions, comes up to me, shakes my hand, and says, great work, that's cool. Why don't you keep in touch with me, and let's see what we can do, and I'll run things through Jeff. So then Stephen Miller became a contact of mine as I was writing Trump's first foreign policy speech, and we were talking about other issues as well. So Stephen Miller and I we connected at that meeting. So this notion that Jeff Sessions, who was then probably as senior or about as senior as Donald Trump, was pushing back and ridiculizing me for this proposal, and then I, for some reason, would continue to try and arrange a meeting is nonsense. So that's all I could say about that.
Right. So then just continue the timeline here in terms of the interactions with Mifsud, that you become suspicious. It seems like he's just BSing you, or there's something that's not right about this entire situation.
Sorry, I didn't hear you. Sorry.
You come to believe that there's something not right about the situation with Mifsud, right? When what he's promising does not pan out.
Exactly. So, at that point, I start, I'm very busy. I'm in London. I'm meeting with various diplomats, basically trying to understand their perspective on Trump. I start to meet the Australians for the first time, which I could get into, and why that entire meeting with Downer was a setup. And I tell Mifsud, hey, look, the campaign's really not interested. There's nothing really I can do for you at this point, and I don't know what we're going to do. So he says, why don't we meet one more time? And he emails me, and he told me, hey, I'm going to Russia, or I'm in Russia, and I'm attending some meetings at the Valdai, or the Duma, which is the Congress of Russia. And why don't we meet in London when I'm back? I say, okay, let's meet one more time. I'll get a free lunch out of this guy. And he meets with me at the Andaz Hotel, I think on April 26th, 2016. And this is at a 5-star hotel in front of probably 50 people in London, okay? He leans over to me and he says, hey, the Russians have Hillary Clinton's emails? And
so is that how he starts the conversation, or is that are there greetings exchanged first?
It was very quick. We weren't. There was no real foreplay involved. Okay,
right.
It was basically
it's kind of a curious way to begin a friendly exchange.
Yeah, it was basically like, hey, order your brunch, and I got something to tell you. And he drops this bomb on me. And I tell him, what do you mean? And he starts pointing at himself, and he says, they told me. So he never told me who really told him this information, and how he got this information, or whether it was credible. So,
and let me just ask you, because in the book you say that when he made this bombshell revelation, you were horrified because it could be suggestive of something treasonous going on.
Yes,
was that really your? And I'm just trying to be a little bit adversarial with you here for a second, because I feel like if I was in that position, I don't know that I would be horrified or think of not necessarily something treasonous was underway. I would be kind of cautiously intrigued or something. I don't know. Was that really your reaction?
Look, it was twofold. One, I started to feel a little uncomfortable because, one, this is a person who introduced me to no one, and all of a sudden he's dropping this strange information. I was scared, actually, so maybe that would be the better word than horrified, of why is he actually telling me this information in such a public arena, such as the the lobby of a hotel in London. And three, why he wasn't telling me who told him, except that the quote, they told me, meaning whoever he was talking. He was keeping things very vague and ambiguous, such as he was dropping a carrot in my lap that I didn't want to see what I would do with it. And in tradecraft, this is called the dangle operation. And I think that's exactly what the purpose of that was for him to drop this information in my lap, and assuming he was working with the FBI. And I would reference everyone listening to this show to read my testimony to the Congress. And quite frankly, I think you can see what I saw Mark Meadows telling me, and that is that there's potentially transcripts of my meetings with both Alexander Downer and Joseph Mifsud. So the story and the plot thickens now after my testimony to the Congress.
So when he says he has emails of, or he says he was told that the Russians have emails of Clinton, whatever that may mean,
yeah,
what was your interpretation of what he was referencing exactly by emails?
State Department emails.
Because I was going to say that was around the time when there was a big controversy raging over Hillary Clinton's deletion and eradication of emails that were housed on her private server that was then under FBI investigation, or rather she was under FBI investigation pertaining to her conduct having to do with the use of that server. So it wasn't as if by emails of Clinton you would think he was referencing the emails that would later be released by WikiLeaks, right?
No, I never heard the name John Podesta, and I never heard the term DNC from out of his mouth. If I did, it would have been very intriguing, but I never did. He said thousands of Hillary Clinton's emails, and we all know that the 30,000 missing emails of Clinton's were from her State Department server. Now, many people ask me, well, how do you connect all this with Alexander Downer and FBI, and where do you come up with these theories of yours where you're talking about? And basically, after Joseph Mifsud told me that information, that's when my life became very bizarre in London. And what do I mean by this? I had the Times of London reach out to me, I think 4 days after that meeting on May 1st. And they interviewed me about David Cameron's disparaging remarks about Donald Trump, about his Muslim ban comments. And I basically made a remark like, allies shouldn't talk like this to one another, and it would behoove David Cameron to retract his comments. But in a sensationalized format, the London Times wrote that Trump advisor demands apology from David Cameron, or the special relationship is at risk. So it made global headwaves, and I almost got fired from the campaign from it, but Hope Hicks saved my job, actually, after she told me that Donald Trump liked it. So it was a pretty funny story. And I give this interview on May 1st, and I had been in touch with an Australian diplomat named Erica Thompson around 2 weeks before that, even before Mifsud told me this information. Now, why would the Australians be meeting with me in London, considering that they now have such a big role to play in this entire saga? And leading up to my meeting with Downer, not only had I met his intel officer assistant 3 weeks before I met Downer, after the interview in the Times of London, I was approached by two military attachés from the U.S. Embassy named Gregory Baker and Terrence Dudley, who emailed me out of the blue, met with me, and basically told me, I think on May 5th, that we know everything about you. I remember Terrence Dudley was referencing his thesis he did at Tufts on the energy business in the Caucasus and why my work in the Mediterranean and the energy business is so interesting. And basically they were spying on me, for lack of a better word. And they tried to later on ingratiate themselves within the Trump campaign. So that's a whole different story that is now being investigated by Congress. But so after that, I'm contacted by Erica Thompson, the Australian intelligence officer, on May 6th. And she said, why don't you meet with me and my boss, Alexander Downer? He just happens to be, the ex-foreign minister of Australia. He led the CIA equivalent of Australia for 17 years. And, he's a guy you should meet. And I said, okay. So I get to this meeting with Alexander Downer. And I explain it in my book. immediately I thought that he was spying on me. And he wasn't even making it a secret that he was spying on me. And what do I mean by this? I sit down at the table, and the first thing he tells me before hello is, I want to let you know that you better stop bothering my friend David Cameron, and your boss should stop bothering my friend David Cameron. And I looked at him shocked, because this isn't, first of all, it wasn't diplomatic. And two, I've never had a foreign diplomat, speak like that to me. And then he begins to pull his phone out and record me, or at least I thought he was recording me. And
by the way, just to give some political context, and then please continue in your description here. But so David Cameron was the prime minister at the time.
Yes.
In the lead up to the Brexit referendum, which was coming up in June of 2016, and David Cameron was a Remainer, so he was a conservative.
Yes.
But he was against Brexit, and
yes.
Although ostensibly you would think that they would not be on the same page politically, David Cameron and Barack Obama were very much allies. And David Cameron invited Obama to come to the UK to give a speech about why Britons should not vote for Brexit, which obviously backfired. So there was overlap here in terms of the political priorities of the ruling parties in both the US and the UK at the time.
Yes, and also Australia had an involvement because they wanted the TPP, which is a Trans-Pacific Partnership, and Trump was against it. Okay, so basically you have the UK,
and also Obama had advisors, key Obama advisors like Jim Messina.
Yes,
had gone to work for Cameron, so there was they were literally sharing personnel, meaning Obama and Cameron.
Yes, yes. So these people obviously had vested interests in a Clinton presidency for many reasons, and Downer himself has a personal relationship with Bill and Hillary, not only a political relationship. So he begins to tell me, about my business in the Mediterranean, and he was very intrigued by that. Like he was probing me, profiling me about my ties to the Israelis, my ties to Cyprus, to Egypt, to why I'm promoting American companies at a time when the Australian energy company Woodside was trying to actually gain a foothold in Cyprus and Israel. And he would just take his phone out and hold it up as if he was recording me. And I was in shock. It's almost like a surreal moment in which you're sitting across from an ambassador, and he's spying on you, but you're so shocked at what's happening, you don't know what to say. And that's what the entire meeting was. It was a very hostile meeting. It was him pulling his phone out a lot. And I was so disturbed, actually, by his behavior at this meeting that 7 months before that nonsensical New York Times story came out about me and him drinking, I reported him to the FBI and Bob Mueller myself. And this is something that no one really understands except now. And I tell Andrew Goldstein, who was one of Bob Mueller's top prosecutors who was involved in my case, look, I don't know what this Alexander Downer guy was doing, but he was spying on me. And Goldstein tells me, how do you know he was recording your conversation? Meaning he was recording my conversation. And I pulled out my phone and I pointed it upright and I showed Andrew Goldstein and the FBI officers in the room what Alexander Downer was doing and why I felt that he was spying on me. And basically you could hear a pin drop in the room. Fast forward 7 months, that's crazy, weird story from the New York Times comes out about me being drunk with him talking about emails. And
you weren't drunk, right? You had one drink?
Of course not. We had one drink, and it was a very unpleasant conversation. Now, let's look at the facts about this meeting. And this is why my testimony to Congress is so important, and why I believe it actually has been released, and why the Australians have been begging Donald Trump not to declassify FISA, because it's my understanding that even Mark Meadows and other members of Congress understand that Alexander Downer was no random diplomat. He was indeed a asset sent to make contact with me, and he was recording or spying on me. And there are likely transcripts of that meeting, and you could see it just based on the questioning of Mark Meadows and my responses. So I want everyone to actually look back.
Right? Yeah. Because if You would think he would try to be surreptitiously recording you. Why would he be so ostentatious about it? It doesn't really make sense.
Well, maybe it's because they needed, and this is just my theory, okay? And I'm just giving facts first, and now this is theory. My theory is that they needed a picture of me, and there was possibly a video recording where they needed to see George Papadopoulos as the man talking about whatever we were talking about in that bar, besides China and energy politics in the Mediterranean. I don't understand where this nonsense about Clinton and Russia came about, because I never talked about it with him. So where it becomes very bizarre is Joseph Mifsud on April 26th tells me, hey, George, the Russians have Hillary's emails, okay? Now we know he's connected to Western intelligence and was likely working with the FBI, according to his own lawyer. So we have an asset who tells George Papadopoulos, hey, the Russians have emails. And then 2 weeks later, we have another asset, Alexander Downer, there to ostensibly retrieve that information. Okay? So let's assume something was discussed about emails, even though I never talked that about him. Why then would Stefan Halpern, this weaponized CIA MI6 asset, lure me to London in September of 2016 and ask me what I know about the Russians having emails, if Alexander Downer's testimony was so ironclad and legitimate? The answer is he would not be needed if that was the case.
And we know Stefan Halpern was an FBI informant. I mean, that's confirmed.
Well, I don't think he was just FBI, by the way, and I'll just explain why.
But we know at the very least that he was an FBI informant.
Yes, that we do know, but we also need to look at the facts, and the facts are that he brought me to London to meet with him, where the FBI does not have jurisdiction, the CIA has jurisdiction, and the MI6 has jurisdiction. And the same day that I met Stefan Halpern, I'm invited to meet with the British Ministry of Foreign Affairs at their office with Tobias Ellwood, who just happened to be the number 2 under Boris Johnson at the time. So unless Stefan Halpern was completely rogue and that the British government did not understand or know that there was an operation against an American citizen in London the same day that I'm meeting with them, I think that's absurd. So clearly the British and the CIA or whoever was involved with Halpern were working together, and that's actually part of the scandal now that's going to probably showcase the UK's involvement in illicit spying and possibly trying to sabotage the campaign.
What is your interpretation of Halpern's ideological motives? Because I remember reading a book by Halpern in college, actually. It was called America Alone, and it was actually a pretty good book. It was a critique of George W. Bush's foreign policy with regard to Iraq.
Interesting.
It's you would think that he might actually have some sympathies with aspects of what of Trump's approach to foreign policy, but maybe not. Either way, where did you perceive him coming from ideologically?
Sure. So I received an unsolicited email in September of 2016 from Stefan Halpern. I had no idea who this person was. I did a simple Google search on him. I saw he was apparently a professor at Cambridge and that he had worked for 4 U.S. presidents, and he was about 74 years old. I had no idea that he was involved in espionage before and that he was connected to the MI6 and CIA. And he emailed me and he said, George, I want to pay you $3,000 for you to write a report on your analysis, I should say, on the Eastern Mediterranean energy game and Turkey. And you're a recognized expert. So that's how he framed this email to me. And I said, sure, it's no big deal.
This was after we now know the official FBI investigation was underway as of July 31st, 2016. Yes. Crossfire Hurricane was launched. I mean, so he's contacting you after all that's officially been launched.
Yes, and I want everyone to understand that there's a common theme between my interactions with all of these individuals, and that is my ties to Israel and the energy business in that part of the world, okay? To the point where I'm being paid by Stefan Halpern to write a report about that particular topic. And moving forward, when we get to that point, you'll see that the FBI wanted to charge me with a FARA violation with Israel. So my entire case and all of this surveillance, when it is finally exposed and probably the new investigation is complete, you'll understand that this was all about my involvement with the Israelis and nothing to do with Russia. But before we get to that point, I go to London, and there's a young lady, a seductive young girl, who tries to seduce me. And she is apparently an assistant of his, a Turkish assistant. And I meet with her before I meet Stefan Halpern, and she's buying me drinks. She's basically telling me that if I give her some information on the campaign, she'll, sleep with me. It was very just a weird situation, because I was kind of laughing at it because I'm thinking that this isn't real. This can't be real, I said. First of all, a Cambridge assistant doesn't look like her. And
this entire saga is pretty surreal.
yeah, it was nuts. I'm meeting this person. Her name is Azra Turk, which probably many people don't realize, but Stefan Halpern had another spy working with him when he was trying to entrap me. And she's buying me drinks. She's very beautiful. She's basically telling me, I'm going to sleep with you. Just give me some information and we'll go back to my room. And I'm laughing at her because I'm thinking, what is going on here? I don't know anything about Russia or Russian emails or anything like that. So what is she talking about? So anyway, I kind of laugh it off. I had a girlfriend at the time anyway. I went back to my room and I was laughing about it with her. And the next day, I see the assistant again, and she's, pouring us coffee, and, Stefan Halpern's there. He's sweating. He's a morbidly obese guy, and he's belligerent. And he's like, you know what, George, your views on Turkey and the Israelis and the energy business are dangerous, and you better not be advising Donald Trump on your thoughts. And I was dumbfounded. I was thinking to myself, wait a minute, I thought you are paying me for my thoughts, but now you're castigating me. And we were having this bizarre back and forth about why the Israelis should or should not be working with Turkey vis-a-vis Egypt and Greece, okay? And I said, okay. And I left that meeting and I went and met with Tobias Ellwood, who was the number 2 under Boris Johnson, where he was probing me as well about my ties to the Israelis, the energy business, Cyprus. And Cyprus is very important for many people to understand because Cyprus to Americans may mean nothing. To the British, it means everything. And what do I mean by this? Cyprus was a British colony up until 1960. And the British to this day have 2 sovereign military bases on the island and the largest radar system in the world that eavesdrops into the Middle East, okay? It's an island situated 45 minutes from Israel and south of Turkey and north of Egypt. It's a very strategic island in which I had connections going up to the president of, and we had been discussing why American troops should remove the British from Cyprus with Trump. So there was obviously a motivation for the British to spy on me and to understand what I was advising the campaign on from that angle, okay? Nothing about Russia. So after I leave my meeting with Tobias Ellwood, who was talking to me about Cyprus and what I'm advising Trump on Cyprus and Iran and other issues, I go back to my hotel and I'm about to leave the next day, and Stefan Halpern says, before you go, let's have a drink at the Sofitel in London. And I say, okay, Stefan, let's have a drink before I say goodbye. And it's at that meeting where he takes his phone and he puts it right in front of him on the table. So right away, I thought this guy was spying on me. I said, there's something off about this whole situation, from the honeypots all the way to this guy. He starts to sweat. He's like 400 pounds. His body language is bizarre. And he's looking at me with these bogged out eyes, basically, like, hey, you're going to tell me everything you know about Russia. And you're involved with them, aren't you?
And he says stuff like, I know you know about the emails, right?
Yes, exactly. It's like he was trying to get me to say something that he knew I had no information about. And when I wasn't telling him it, he was getting pissed. Or
say something incriminating.
Yes. And I was looking at him. And this is actually going to be part of what is going to be declassified moving forward, I believe. That's what I've been told, that there's a transcript of my meeting with Stefan Halpern. He was wired, or he was just recording the conversation on his phone, where I tell him what you're suggesting is treason, and I have nothing to do with it. So basically, the FBI or whoever was involved in this operation has an informant sent my way, and I'm telling them I'm innocent, yet they come after me still, and they try and ruin my life. So that's actually going to be a part of the evidence and the exculpatory evidence and some of the declassified stuff that's going to be coming out moving forward. It's especially regarding Stefan Halpern's role in this entire saga. So I leave London. I submit my report to him. He pays me $3,000, and his honeypot continues to try and meet with me when I'm in the U.S. I never meet with her, fortunately. Then I describe in the book, Sergey Millian becomes a very prominent person in my life. He's ended up becoming some sort of source for the Steele dossier, and I believe he was actually working with the FBI, and I give evidence of why I believe that in my book. So,
and the Washington Post did a story on Millian, and they claim in that story that there's no evidence of him being in league with the FBI. But maybe your theory is correct. Maybe it's not. We don't know for sure yet.
Well, all I'll say is, and this is what I write in my book, is that what I say is what was said by his associate at the inauguration.
Right.
An associate of his was meeting with Millian and I at the inauguration, and his name was Aziz Shouki, this Moroccan American guy. I don't understand where he found this person, and he tells me, "Hey George, you know that Sergey's working for the FBI." And I look at Sergey, and Sergey doesn't respond. It was one of these Twilight Zone moments, because a month before that statement, Sergey Millian, I thought, was trying to entrap me with a bizarre financial scheme where he was going to pay me $30,000 a month to work for him and Trump at the same time, which was clearly some sort of illegal business offer, which I thought, he was either wired or he was trying to entrap me, and I rejected. So moving forward, 5 days or so after Sergey Millian's associate tells me he was working for the FBI, there's a front page story at the Wall Street Journal that says Sergey Millian is the source of the dossier, and he's basically connected to Christopher Steele and all these people trying to undermine Trump. And the FBI comes to my house, and I think at the time, hey, they're going to talk to me about Sergey, and that's what they told me. They said, hey, we're here to talk to you about Sergey. And I get down to the FBI meeting with them, and they show me a picture of Sergey Millian, and they say, do you know him? I say, of course. And I tell them everything, and they say, well, I'm just letting you know we don't really care about Sergey, and we're here to talk to you about a lot of different things. And the FBI agents then begin to talk to me about the Israelis, if I'm being cultivated by Israeli intelligence, whether, to describe certain meetings I had with Israeli ministers. And I started to laugh a bit. I'm like, what are you talking about? I just have connections. I mean, I'm not a spy, or what are you talking about? And then that's when the conversation segued into, okay, George, so what do you know about hacked emails in Russia? And I say, I've never met a Russian official in my entire life, but there was a bizarre man called Joseph Mifsud who told me in London one day that the Russians have Hillary's emails and you should look into him. And when I told the FBI agents this information, there was a strange thing that happened because there was no response. It's as if I told these two agents, the sky is blue and 2 + 2 = 4. They then looked at me in an aggressive manner, and they said, so when did you meet this guy? And then they caught me in this perjury trap where I misremembered when I met him. And
so just to be clear, you volunteered your interaction with Mifsud to the FBI. It wasn't the converse where they raised it to you. It was something that you brought up yourself.
Absolutely not. I brought it up voluntarily. I said, there's this guy, Joseph Mifsud. He's Maltese. He told me this information. He also introduced me to this Russian girl called Olga, who he said was Putin's niece. And it's as if when I was telling him this information, they were mad that they didn't catch me in a lie about that. So then they wanted to get me in a perjury trap, which they ended up getting me in, about, so when did you meet this guy? How many times did you meet him? And after 3 hours of an interrogation, I misremembered when I met him, and my charging documents suggested I lied to them because I told them I met him in April when I met him in March. So that's how ridiculous my entire case is.
Right.
And why people are just like laughing right now when they actually understand what I even pled guilty to.
And at the time, your mindset was something like, I know that I'm not party to any collusion conspiracy, so therefore I'm going to assist these benevolent FBI agents with their duty to, investigate whatever it is they're investigating. You didn't think that you were at any criminal risk or had any liability in that way, right? Because otherwise, the normal advice in these situations would be to, even if you're 100% innocent, you got to get a lawyer. You got to, follow that kind of protocol.
Look, of course I should have had lawyers with me, and I did not understand that I was basically being set up to be a patsy by my own government and probably foreign governments too. Because, later on we found out that Joseph Mifsud, after I notified the FBI about him, was, as I explained earlier in our conversation, speaking on panels with Ash Carter in Saudi Arabia. He was in D.C. 2 weeks after my FBI interview, speaking at a State Department-sponsored conference, by the way. This is all public. No, this is all public record. So a guy that I tell the FBI is a potential Russian spy who had knowledge of Hillary Clinton's emails is given carte blanche to speak at State Department-sponsored conferences 2 weeks after that, going to Saudi Arabia, talking on panels with Ash Carter, and by the time my name is released a year later, or 11 months after my initial FBI interview, he's photographed with Boris Johnson. So the story suggests to me that he was in on it with the FBI. He's likely being protected, maybe not by the FBI itself, but by friendly intelligence services. And there's a reason that, no one has seen him in 2 years, except I've received information recently that he's actually on the payroll of a Link campus in Rome, which just happens to be the same CIA FBI school that I met him at initially. So this is the Joseph Mifsud saga. I explained in my book the moment I realized I was set up and framed was at a meeting I had in December of 2017 in Washington, 2 months after my name was released, where I go to them and I tell them, guys, meaning Mueller, this is to Mueller and his prosecutors and to the FBI, I say, guys, I understand.
Is this Mueller personally, or is it's his team?
Mueller walked in the room and then he left, and then I spoke to his team and I said, guys, okay, I screwed up. I understand. I pled guilty, but why are you not arresting Joseph Mifsud? I told you guys a year ago that he was a spy potentially for the Russians and he had Hillary Clinton's emails. Why are you allowing him to live openly in London, of all places? And why is he being photographed with Boris Johnson? And you know what they did? They started laughing at me. And the FBI agent looked at me and he said, if only you wore the wire against him, George, like we asked you, none of this would have happened to you. And he's a man of many connections. It was as if I entered the Twilight Zone at that moment. I was horrified. I was terrified. I understood that the FBI set me up, that they had no real case against me. And it was after that meeting in December when I started to talk with reporters, and actually that's how Stefan Halpern was outed, because I outed him, by the way, and I can explain how that happened. It's a very funny story, by the way, and why even going to my prison sentence, I was actually openly discussing withdrawing from my guilty agreements and hired new counsel because I understood that there was no real case against me and it was all fabricated. So maybe you remember that, or maybe people listening to the show might remember that I was openly trying to get out of my agreement I had. But unfortunately, my new counsel said it's impossible to get out of your guilty agreement and that you should just, do your 11 nights in jail. So I knew very quickly that I was set up, and that's why I felt that they couldn't do anything to me and why I was talking to the media. And there was one funny story I want to give you of how actually Stefan Halpern was outed, because this is something I didn't even talk about in my book because I didn't have the permission from the reporter to do it until now. So
exclusive Papadopoulos scoop coming up.
This is an exclusive, and you're going to love it. In March of 2018, March of 2018, I'm in Chicago. I'm, living in a studio with my then girlfriend, now wife, and I have a lot of time on my hands because the government keeps extending my sentencing. They're screwing with me, and I'm like, okay, let me start talking to some reporters. So the Daily Caller reaches out to me. Chuck Ross very good guy. He's a young reporter there.
Right. Who's had some of the best reporting on Trump-Russia overall.
Exactly. So this is March 2018, okay? This is before he became kind of a famous person for his reporting. And he contacts me. He's like, hey, man, can we just meet? You know, I don't understand what your involvement is in this. It doesn't make sense to me. So he was on to something. And I said, look, please, let's meet. I'm in Chicago. He drove from St. Louis, and we met in Chicago. And we go out for sushi at a restaurant called Sunda. It's a sushi place in Chicago. And we're just talking, and I say, Chuck, I don't know what this story is about me. It makes no sense. I've never met a Russian official in my life. I think this guy Mifsud was working with the FBI. And, you know, my head was spinning at that time. This is March 2018. And so a year and 1 month ago, okay? And I tell him, but you know what, Chuck? I was having a lot of bizarre meetings with a lot of these Western intelligence types and British diplomats and Australian diplomats. And I said there was this guy, Stefan Halpern, who paid me money to go out and see him. And he started to talk to me about Russia, and like he was spying on me. And, you know, Chuck was like, that's fascinating. And then all of a sudden, 2 weeks later, he writes this incredible story, which I think is still pinned on his Twitter account. Suspicious London meeting. A London meeting raised suspicions with Papadopoulos, something like that. It's on his pinned profile right now, and you could see when that was printed. It was I think April or May of 2018, and it was after our dinner, and then all hell broke loose because somehow he was outed as a as a FBI informant, as a CIA guy.
March 25th, 2018 is the date on that, actually.
Exactly. So that's how that article came about. That's how Stefan Halpern was outed, and it all started from a sushi dinner.
Well, there you go.
So that's just part of the bizarre nature of what we've been living as a country, what my story has been. And, you know, I'm pretty sure his Stefan Halpern's involvement in this entire case is probably going to be much more extensive than even you know, trying to meet me in London. He probably was a very, very important source for the FBI, and we'll see where it leads. But that's actually how he was exposed.
Clarify one thing for me. So in your book and in kind of the popular perception of you, it's sort of understood that you were the specific impetus for the initiation of the FBI investigation. However, I don't know that we've fully established that yet, right? Because your dealings with Mifsud were in March and April, right? And then Crossfire Hurricane wasn't launched until the 31st of July. So we don't know like what the causal link there is in terms of what specific event led the FBI to launch that investigation. It may have been you, it may have been other factors, it may have been a confluence of things. What is your understanding of that?
Well, Mark Meadows was on a podcast, I think 2 days ago, where he said that Papadopoulos was probably 5% of the reason for the so-called predicate into the investigation. And, you know, 95% was basically the dossier. And probably people like Mike Flynn's and Carter Page's possibly suspicious ties to Russia. Because, of course, I had no ties to Russia. And, of course, the FBI and the CIA and MI6 and Mossad and all these people would have known that. So when I was meeting with Downer and he was recording me, it suggested to me that that was part of an operation with Mifsud to maybe create a fake predicate or some false pretext to have some sort of information to provide to a FISA judge to get warrants and to launch the investigation. But I don't think that was justified, or it could have been the only reason to open up an investigation. I just think it was the cover story, basically. And I think,
or in other words, they weren't so genuinely troubled by your supposed ties or the information that you possessed that led them to open the investigation. They wanted to open the investigation anyway and needed a convenient in that you provided, and that's why they had this kind of succession of spooks coming into your life.
yes, and look, and moving forward after all this bizarre time I had with Mueller and the FBI, I just want to clarify to everyone listening, and I've been in this clear in my book. There was only one question that Mueller, the FBI, wanted to know, and from the beginning until the end of my encounters with them, they had no interest in Joseph Mifsud. Okay, they wanted to know, who did I tell on the campaign about what Mifsud told me, and I told them I didn't tell anybody. But they were trying to basically force me to say I told the campaign, because if I had told the campaign, they thought that they could have created a conspiracy case against Trump. But I never told anyone on the campaign. So that was actually all they were trying to force out of me during my 25 hours of interrogation. And during my last hour with them, they told me, if you don't plead guilty, we're going to charge you with a FAR violation for working with the Israelis. So going back to the beginning of this conversation, as I explained, my background has nothing to do with Russia. It has everything to do with my ties to the Middle East and Israel and the energy business there. Alexander Downer was probing me about those ties to the Israelis. The two DIA guys in London were probing me about those ties. Stefan Halpern paid me $3,000 to write a report about those ties. And the FBI, during my first interview with them, were curious about those ties. And then later on, they had some fake or formal charge with a FAR violation about my ties to Israel, which I probably would have been the first person in history to have been prosecuted for that. So that's why the story, I just wanted to make it clear, is much stranger than has been reported in the media. I'm sure that, something about Israel's involvement is probably going to be released eventually. But the way I was pinned in a Russia conspiracy when I have no Russia connections, to me suggests that there was something else that I was targeted for, and this was a cover story.
I know you said Mueller walked in the room that one time in late 2017, but did he personally question you at any point over the course of these 25 hours?
Never.
No. Okay.
Never.
If you can, just summarize your view of the approach taken prosecutorially by these people on his team. I mean, what was your sense of how they were treating you, what their overall objective was? I mean, you say that they were trying to answer that one particular question, but
yes,
what tactics did they employ to achieve that?
Sure. Well, let's go to my second encounter with the FBI, where they're telling me wear a wire against Mifsud. And I say, no. My third encounter with the FBI, they're not even asking me about Mifsud anymore. The DOJ brings in lawyers with the FBI to meet with me in my lawyer's office, including Kevin Kleinsmith, who was the lawyer who was talking about Viva la Resistance and then was fired.
And this is all, and by the way, people should know, this is all now in 2017, so we're into the Trump administration at this point. Yes.
This is February 2017. And Kevin Kleinsmith and the people in the room were not talking to me about Mifsud. So the guy who told me this information was not of interest to these people, but they wanted to know one thing, and I explained this in the book. Who did you tell on the campaign? And I said, I never told anyone on the campaign. So from 2017, they were just focused on that question. And all through my interrogation with the FBI and Mueller, after they violently arrested me at an airport, they threw me in a cell after I hadn't slept in 30 hours, after I had been on a transatlantic flight.
Violently arrested meaning what exactly?
Meaning you're taking a person off a shuttle bus with 7 FBI agents and dragging him into an undisclosed room at Dulles Airport and putting handcuffs and shackles around his ankles without telling him why he's being arrested. And as they're searching through my bags looking for something, which I believe was money, regarding this other person, and not reading me my Miranda rights, and then throwing me in a cell with 2 people that without me understanding what is going on. So that's the definition of a violent arrest, in my opinion.
You even say at one point they threatened to charge you with a Logan Act violation?
Yes.
Because of the meeting that you arranged with Sisi? Because that's incredible. I mean, that's several hundred-year-old statute that's virtually never employed.
I'll never forget it. Aaron Zelinsky, which was one of the prosecutors involved in my case, was saying, we're going to get you with the Logan Act violation. Do you know what the Logan Act is, Mr. Papadopoulos? And I said, no. And then I Googled it later on, and I saw it was a law that hadn't been prosecuted in, I think, 200 years. And
it was enacted in
what?
1799, people. Literally.
Yes. So they were saying, so you're going to get a Logan Act violation potentially because you were helping him with Egypt and your connections in the Middle East. And I was just dumbfounded. I mean, the best way I could describe these people is there was prosecutorial misconduct involved here. They saw me as a younger guy with limited funds. I was under sealed, so I couldn't raise funds. I couldn't speak to my network. I couldn't go to the media. And they used that to their advantage. And, fortunately for them, they could do that. And unfortunately for them, though, I wouldn't lie to them to make their case, which was all around who did I tell in the campaign about emails, because as I stated, if I had told somebody on the campaign, they would have probably bolstered a conspiracy case that they were trying to make, even though they understood that there was a fake conspiracy that Western intelligence organizations had fabricated. So this was a corrupt investigation. Mueller is a corrupt individual. I am not shy about that. And, that's the premise that I'm working on. And I'm very curious to see if he continues to lie to the world and characterize Joseph Mifsud as a Russian agent. In the Mueller report, now that we have all this new evidence, my book has come out, and even people like Mark Meadows and Lindsey Graham are going public and suggesting that Mifsud was a Western agent, not a Russian agent. So I'm very curious to see how the Mueller report's going to come out.
And by the way, given all those extremely overzealous tactics that they employed prosecutorially, it's an even bigger deal that Mueller has found nothing to establish a Trump-Russia conspiracy, because obviously they were extremely aggressive in pursuing every conceivable angle to come up with a finding of a conspiracy. So again, that just kind of underscores the significance of that conclusion.
Well, it also underscores why I was targeted the way I was, because I was a person who had this information planted in my brain by Western intelligence assets, who obviously the Obama administration, the FBI, the CIA, MI6 knew the entire time. And that's what makes this case so corrupt. And why I'm very happy now that Donald Trump has decided to declassify FISA materials, which are going to expose the British and the Australians. And for everyone listening who might not know, the British and the Australians were the two countries who called Donald Trump 2 months ago and essentially implored him not to declassify that material because they understand they're up to their neck in it. It's just a story that, the best way I could summarize this whole bizarre saga without confusing people is not only did Donald Trump not receive help from Russia, likely, he had the stacks decked against him, and he ended up winning. And what I mean by the stacks decked against him is that the UK, Australia, and other governments, likely the Italians too, were colluding with the FBI and the CIA to undermine him in his campaign, and he still won. Because this whole notion that we were colluding and working with Russians has not only been debunked by people like myself and others, but by Mueller himself. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see where these new investigations lead now that William Barr is at the helm of the Department of Justice, and what people like Devin Nunes have in store for people who might have been committing crimes on their own, trying to set us up. So very, very curious to see where this is going to lead now.
Right. So the full Mueller report is set to come out on Thursday. We don't know what kind of redactions are going to be entailed there, but do you anticipate anything new coming out pertaining to you, or what do you expect?
I am expecting that Joseph Mifsud might be involved there, but as a confidential source for Western intelligence or the FBI itself. And his name might be redacted because it's my understanding, I've been told this by very high-level reporters in D.C., that Joseph Mifsud is involved in the Brussels 302s. I don't know why or how that's what the connection is there, But I'm pretty sure that that might be disclosed in the Mueller report. And I'm not sure what else could be said about Russia because no one was dealing with Russians. I mean, I know Mike Flynn had a call with the Russian ambassador, which was completely legal, but no one else was dealing with the Russian government, especially me and some of the other people who were involved in this Mueller probe, including Paul Manafort. I think he was connected to Ukraine, not even to Russia. So,
right. Let me ask you on a personal level. So,
yeah,
around this period in 2018, when you were meeting with Chuck Ross, you say in the book that you felt like you were descending into a form of madness because
yes,
there was always the potential of people watching you or you're being surveilled. There was a FISA warrant used on you. We later found out. So, on a day-to-day level, what was that? What was it
well,
like?
Let me qualify what you just stated about the FISA warrant because that's important. In April of 2017, before my arrest, okay, I had the New York Times.
You were arrested in July of 2017.
Yes. Okay, so in April of 2017, I was in New York. I think I was meeting my girlfriend, or my new girlfriend at the time, Simona, who's not my wife.
We also had dealings with Mifsud in one of the grand ironic twists of this whole thing.
It's an incredible thing, and quite frankly, if we have time, I want to explain to you why Mueller actually went after her. And it had to do with her knowing about Mifsud.
I'm willing to go as long as you want to go, so I got all the time in the world.
Okay, so it's up to you. I know so it's up to you. I don't want to keep you up too late, but
I'm good. I'm good. So I took a nap.
In April, okay, in April of 2017, I was in New York meeting my then brand new girlfriend, who I just met in New York, Simona, and I get a message on LinkedIn by Matt Rosenberg, who is a very prominent New York Times reporter in Washington, and Brian Ross and Rhonda Schwartz, who are prominent investigative journalists at ABC News at the time, within 48 hours or 24 hours of one another. I think it was like April 11 or April 12 or something. And I'm like, okay, what do you want to talk about? So I go to DC and I go to New York, or I'm in New York, or I go back to New York. I can't remember exactly. And I meet Rhonda Schwartz and Brian Ross at ABC News, and they're like, "Oh my God, don't tell me what I've read or heard about you was true because you seem like such a nice guy." And I started laughing. I'm like, "What are you talking about?" Because they're like, "Well, do you know that you have a FISA warrant on you?" And I said, "What are you talking about? How could I have a FISA warrant on me?" And they say, did you know that your bank records were subpoenaed and that you were wiretapped? And then I said, no. They said, well, you should look into it. And I said, and in my mind, my mind was spinning because 3 months before that, the FBI is at my house. The month before that, this bizarre guy called Charles Towell contacts me. And now ABC News is telling me I have a FISA warrant on me. And I don't understand what it is. The next day or next week, I go and I meet Matt Rosenberg of the New York Times in DC. And he's like very interested in talking to me. And he's like, he was more coy. He never told me that, you had a FISA on you, but he was very, he was probing me a lot, like very intrigued with me. And I said, God, look, I don't know what this Russia stuff is, but I don't have any connections to Russia. I was just connected in the Middle East and to the Israelis. And he just looks at me like that's what my FISA warrant was about. It was about my ties to the Israelis. And, he shakes my hand and he says, let's be in touch. And then, then I get arrested in July. So that's how I learned that I had a FISA warrant on me. And then, of course, throughout my entire interrogations and meetings with Mueller and his team, I could understand, quite frankly, that they had been spying on me for my ties to the Israelis. And even in my testimony to the Congress, which is now public, you can see that, even Mark Meadows has information that I was being illicitly spied on due to my ties to Israel and the Middle East. So this is the essence of my case. what I was targeted for, why the quote unquote deep state was after me. And it's very sensitive. I could understand completely why this psyop was used against the American people in my case, where I was characterized as patient zero of a Russia conspiracy, because the reality is far more pernicious and sensitive and involves a very important U.S. ally that potentially the U.S. government did not want to expose or disclose to the New York Times or others that that's why they were targeting me. But now that the facts are out there and people like Mark Meadows and William Barr are looking into the origins of the case and FISA abuse, and the president is going to be declassifying all the FISA warrants, I'm pretty sure that that's what's going to end up being revealed whenever all this story comes to an end, and it's probably going to rock the U.S.-Israel relationship to some extent.
And what's the ultimate explanation for that? I mean, what's beneath everything there?
Well, look, Obama had a very bad relationship with the Israelis. That's one. Two, I was working at a conservative think tank with conservative heavyweights like Doug Feith and Scooter Libby and Seth Cropsey, where we were promoting an agenda that was anathema.
Doug Feith being a big-time neoconservative, by the way.
Yes. I was working at the Hudson Institute for 5 years leading up to my time on the campaigns, and the Hudson Institute is probably one of the top three most prominent conservative think tanks in Washington. And it's also a bastion of neoconservative thought and ideology, where all the neocons basically, coalesced after they left the Bush administration. So I had been working with these personalities on very sensitive topics about energy policy, security policy in the Mediterranean, the U.S. Policy towards Israel, the Muslim Brotherhood, Greece, Turkey. And as I explained in the beginning of my book, it was during my time at the Hudson Institute where I gained connections all the way up to the prime minister level in Israel, the president of Cyprus, the prime minister of Greece, where we were hosting them for private workshops, for conferences. They were listening to us. They were ignoring the Obama administration. And, quite frankly, I was being tacitly threatened by the State Department during my time at Hudson, and obviously when I left and joined the campaigns about this particular topic, which happened to be, what is Israel going to do with its natural gas now that it's been discovered, and how is it going to forge security partnerships with its neighbors? And quite frankly, I was a real pioneer in that very sensitive, foreign policy issue and question. And, that's why I believe this entire story came about, and why I had all these spies targeting me, and why eventually Mueller himself and his prosecutors wanted to indict me on a FARA violation because of my ties to the Israelis. I truly believe I was politically targeted as somebody who was promoting an agenda that was against the Obama administration, probably like Mike Flynn. And that's why we were really targeted, because this was a political agenda against us.
But you don't think Robert Mueller would be motivated by some agenda to avenge the Obama administration, right? In regard to Israel.
I believe that Mueller's his appointment was to cover up the Obama administration's illicit spying. Okay, that's my clear premise I'm working on. So I just want to make that clear. And quite frankly, as you can see, the men who had the kitchen sink thrown at them, including myself, Manafort, Flynn, maybe Carter Page and others, the ones that were targeted were the ones who had FISA warrants on them. Now, why would we be targeted the way we were and had our lives turned upside down in order to prevent any discovery in court and force us to plead if we weren't targeted by the Obama administration before Trump even entered office. Because as I explained in my first interview with the FBI in January of 2017, I think a day after Trump was inaugurated or something, the FBI was questioning me about Israel. So clearly, I had a target on me that preceded that interview and might have even gone as far back as 2015. And that's what I was trying to find out myself during my testimony to Congress, but they wouldn't answer those questions.
And when we say Obama administration, maybe we should just clarify that it doesn't necessarily mean Obama himself was directing this at every step, right? I mean, the administration is a vast expanse of individuals. Could include, John Brennan, James Clapper,
Yes.
Comey, all these people.
Yes.
So it's not to make a simple, narrow point about, Barack Obama behind a desk saying, get George.
No. Look, when Mark Meadows he was giving a podcast with Byron York a couple days ago, and he said that when Papadopoulos was announced on the foreign policy team, it probably didn't ring bells to the FBI, but it rang bells to a lot of other agencies. And what I think he was referring to was the CIA, the MI6, and the Mossad. And that's where I think the focus of those groups was on me, because, look, I was living in London a lot of the time on the campaign. I was a traveler. I had an extensive network in Europe and the Middle East. I wasn't an armchair strategist in Washington. And so the FBI probably wouldn't be the one who was keeping tabs on me as much as likely the CIA and other groups. And I give an example about the surveillance on me in my book, where associates of mine and friends of mine, when they were contacted by the FBI, they had surveillance photos presented to them about showing me walking in streets, going to the casino, doing whatever, suggesting that, I was being tailed during my time on the campaign, abroad and domestically. So, I don't know who authorized that, but, it could have been the FBI working with the CIA in tandem. And I think that's why Congressman Mark Meadows is alluding to the fact that my story is probably going to be the most sensitive one in terms of what's going to be revealed, and why he's being very coy about my story and being very careful about what he's releasing prior to any declassified material being released.
Right. So the reason why I brought up the FISA warrant is because in the book you cite it as a point at which you felt like you were descending into madness because of the sense that you were being watched and surveilled and all that, which is reasonable. So I'm just kind of curious about the toll this took on your psychological health. I know at one point you did say that you were dealing with depression, which again is understandable given the gravity of everything that you had been immersed in.
Yeah.
Just on a personal level, what was that like?
If it wasn't for my girlfriend and now wife helping me get through this, I don't know if I would have made it, man. I mean, it was really tough. I mean, I'm not saying I was suicidal. I never was. But you do descend into really dark places, and you're seeing yourself completely eviscerated on TV. Your name is thrown around by people who don't know you. They're calling you a traitor, coffee boy, this, that. You're losing all of your network you worked years to establish. You're bankrupt. And on top of it, you're looking at jail time possibly. So it was a very dark time. It was very difficult to get through it. I lost a lot of friends, a lot of business associates. I did gain a wife in the middle of it. So I'm surprised she married me in this, but she did. Life is beautiful now. I'm in LA. I'm working on interesting projects, including a docuseries. I'm also on the board of advisors of an interesting medical cannabis company called C3 International. My wife is an actress. And I wrote this book.
Lots of people reinvent themselves with cannabis, I find.
They do, but in this case, I don't smoke pot, and I'm not into recreational use.
Okay.
And it's not a recreational company; it's a medical company. And what this company is, it's the only prescription tablet form of marijuana that is used to combat pain. And we're looking to enter the pain market to basically help wean Americans off far more dangerous opioids, which are killing around 300 people a year, or a day, I should say, in this country. So it's pretty much I see it as a necessary part of this battle against the opioid crisis that we're facing. And it's very interesting, and we'll see how it goes. But it's definitely a different industry. It's a new industry. It's obviously not my only interest right now. I'm also looking to get back into politics, quite frankly. There's going to probably be a very big story coming out about me in one of the two major newspapers in this country very soon, a very big profile, which I think might help propel me back into politics. But we'll see what happens moving forward with this investigation now.
All right. Well, I'm in favor of recreational marijuana, just for the record.
I like shisha. That's the closest I like getting to a nice buzz. I have my Apple shisha or hookah, whatever it's called, or some mint grape, and I'm doing good with some nice Arabic lounge music.
All right. Well, I'm for that too. You want to just touch on how your wife became embroiled in the Mueller stuff?
Yeah, sure. So my girlfriend, now wife, Simona, she was my girlfriend at the time when I first contacted her. Or I'm sorry, she wasn't even my girlfriend. So
by the way, you slid into her DMs on LinkedIn to establish. I mean, that's ballsy.
Hey, man, you got once you see something, you got to go after it, even if it's on LinkedIn and you're 4,000 miles away. You know what I mean?
You might be the only guy who's ever done that successfully.
Hey, that's how I met, Naji Idris at the London Center and all these bizarre people. So I ended up finding my wife on there. Who would have thought that? But so I slid my message in to her. Hey, how are you doing? I see that you're working at this company in London. Basically, I was just hitting on her, and I'm just like, hey, we should meet up one day. So we ended up meeting in New York in April of 2017. At the same time, I'm finding out I have a FISA warrant on me. And she's like, hey, I worked for that guy Mifsud. I'm like, what do you mean you worked for Mifsud? She's like, yeah, I worked for him when I was in London and in Brussels. He was
Mifsud, by the way, now is some kind of like supernatural entity or something. He's like he's like Voldemort from Harry Potter.
He really is, and I'm very happy you brought this up because she has a really important part to play in this, and actually she's the one that helped wake me up to the fact that he was not a Russian agent but a Western agent. But she told me, yeah, I worked for him. He's very well connected to a family member of mine called Johnny Pitella. Johnny Pitella was the head of the socialist group at the European Parliament. And he was actually campaigning for Hillary Clinton during the DNC convention. So I said, that's very interesting, because I just notified the FBI about this guy. and I didn't know he was connected to Clinton, and he had connections to the socialists in Europe and people like that. And I'm like, what else do you know? She's like, well, yeah, he's connected a lot to Italy. He's very well connected to like Italian intelligence groups and the minister there. And, I knew him during my time in Brussels, where she was working at the European Parliament for 7 years. And he was coming all the time, meeting with, the head of the European Parliament, the head of the European Commission. And he was a very well-known figure in Europe. I'm like, wait a minute. This is the same guy who told me about Russian emails? And she said, what do you mean? I said, wait, hold on. This guy told me that the Russians have emails, and I just told the FBI about him. And she was like, okay, that's really weird. So moving forward, in the summer of 2017, I'm on vacation with her. And here's where things get really strange. And I've never actually spoken about this until right now. So this is another exclusive. I'm dating Simona, and her family member, this guy Johnny Pitella. This is summer of 2017. Okay, before I'm arrested, goes to her and says, "You should leave George. He's going to get in a lot of trouble." And she's like, "What do you mean he's going to get in a lot of trouble?" And he says, "Just, you don't know him. He's going to get in a lot of trouble, and you should just leave him and cut your losses." And she comes to me and she says, "What do you know? My family member said this about you." And this guy, Johnny Pitella, is best friends with Joseph Mifsud. They actually attended a dinner together with Hillary Clinton, I learned, during the 2016 campaign. And he was very connected. He was connecting Mifsud in Italy a lot. And I said, "Wait a minute, Simona, this is very strange. Something's not connecting in my mind here." And then she said, "Well, I'm just letting you know." Then I get arrested, I think like 2 days after that, when I'm flying back. And the FBI, as you know, I'm arrested. I'm still in this weird situation now with Simona. She's visiting me in Chicago as I'm bankrupt, living with my mother. It's just a horrendous situation to be in because I had to basically spend $150,000 of my life savings on lawyers. And then I couldn't work for 2 years. And as I'm living with my mother and Simona's living with me, with my mother, just to show you how horrible the situation was.
That sounds like a sitcom in the making.
Not only is a sad sitcom, but having a Greek mother, you could imagine how crazy it was. So to make matters worse, one day there's a knock at the door at my mother's home when Simona and I are there. And I open the door and I see the same FBI agent who interrogated me the first time. And he's there and he's like, "We need to talk to Simona." And I say, "What? What do you want to talk to Simona about?" And they say, "Well, if she doesn't want to talk, we'll see what happens." So Simona's like, "I don't want to talk." And then she gets a subpoena by Bob Mueller himself. This is in October of October of 2017, before my name is even published, okay? And they interrogate Simona, and they start asking her about what she knows about Mifsud, what she knows about his ties to Italy, and what she has told people in Europe about me and my case, okay? So they were trying to basically scare her to leave me because she knew too much about Mifsud and his connections to the Europeans and the Italians, okay? She ended up staying with me. She started going on TV, talking about Mifsud and his ties to Western intelligence, and she was causing a big panic in the special counsel's office. Every time she would go on, I think she gave an interview to Jake Tapper on CNN, where she said that Mifsud was connected to the European socialists, and then the Mueller team called me and my lawyers and said, "If she does it again, we're going to pull your plea agreement," and they were very threatened by her. So she ended up becoming like this fierce fighter, defending me and, basically exposing Mifsud for what he was. And that was a well-connected guy to the socialists in Europe and anything but a Russian agent. And, she was giving firsthand accounts of who he was. And quite frankly, if it wasn't for her, maybe my story would have never come out. And maybe, Mifsud would be in hiding as he is today with no one looking for him, and they would never be questioning his allegiance to Russia, as Mueller explained. So she actually probably changed history in many ways, especially regarding my case, because if it wasn't for her, I probably would have had no credibility and I would have had no story to tell, and that's what made her a target.
Right. So eventually you end up reporting to federal prison for a grand total of 12 days, which would be a conspicuously short period of time for somebody who was the key player in a grand global espionage conspiracy to be imprisoned for. But there's sort of an interesting part in your book where you say that you enter the prison and obviously you're apprehensive, but the prisoners all give you a standing ovation when you walk in.
Yeah, they do. It was amazing. Not only that, I mean, I felt a cool relief when, even the prison guards were like, basically, "We know this was BS, this, whatever happened to you, and just let us know what you need and we'll help you out here. You're only in here for 11 nights and, nothing's going to happen to you." And then I get in there, and the prisoners are like standing up, clapping for me, giving me high fives. Because, these are educated people, most of them. The guys that I was in there with, there were doctors, lawyers, businessmen, white collar guys who watch the news every day. And they're in there for like these white collar crimes. And they saw me fighting on my way to jail, and they respected that. And, I took kind of like this journalistic approach to jail. I wasn't, I knew I was only there 11 nights. It was a minimum security place. There were no jail cells. There were no fences. Everybody could walk outside. There was a softball field there. It was just like, it wasn't a big deal. So luckily I was in a safe situation, but of course, no one wants to be in a prison, especially when you find out that you were set up by your own government. And that's why I'm on the offensive now, and why I feel vindicated. And I hope that this story leads to those who really were behind the fake conspiracy, and I hope they get indicted, quite frankly.
Yeah, I mean, we should wrap up, but I want to just kind of ask you to put all this in broader perspective, just in terms of how you look at like the core nature of our governmental institutions at this point, because for what you've been subject to, I mean, you'd probably be entitled at this point to just reject the entire American project, right? How has this shaken your overall faith in, the intelligence services, the law enforcement apparatus? How do you?
I understand. Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, sorry. No, you could. So, what was your last point? Because I was going to make a funny comment about Trump and the intelligence community.
Well, go ahead and make the comment.
I was going to say I completely understand why he says that he doesn't trust them and they're full of crap, because they basically were setting up his team and him, trying to embroil him in a fake conspiracy that he had nothing to do with. And obviously the CIA and the FBI were complicit in that. So when they are those same guys that tell him, hey, Trump, you know that the Russians were involved in interfering, why would he believe them? Because he knows that they were working to set him up. And people like Mike Rogers and others have notified him of this as well. And, so if the president himself doesn't have confidence in the intelligence community because they were basically working against him, why would somebody like me or others who are hearing my story, reading my story, and hearing my testimony, why would they have confidence in them too when they clearly, were out to make me a patsy in this conspiracy with one end game, and that was to impeach the president? So it's a very scary story. I'm actually terrified of the intelligence community now, because I see that they don't have integrity. They're not there to help you. And when the FBI comes knocking at your door, whether they're calling you bro like they were me, they're not your bro. And they're there to basically screw you up. So word of advice to all the listeners, get a lawyer. The FBI comes to your house, and don't talk if you don't have to.
Yeah, but just, beyond Trump and whatever rationale he might have for disbelieving the intelligence services, I'm wondering how this now informs your general perspective on like the American state, because it's that fundamental, right? I mean, if all these resources could have been marshaled from all these various agencies and all these different actors against you in service of making you a patsy in this grand scheme of which we still don't know the full contours, that's gotta be something very deep in terms of how all these governmental structures are kind of oriented. I mean, in the book, you do actually go into, briefly into the history of the CIA, assassinating leaders, and FBI, surveilling people. What kind of just general insights do you have in that regard?
Well, I was going to make you took the words out of my mouth. I was going to say that, but I was also going to say that the CIA and MI6 interfere and meddle in foreign elections all the time. And, you see it in third world countries, usually in Africa or the Middle East or Latin America, where, it's clear, and there's evidence that suggests that, the MI6 and the CIA basically cause and discord and chaos and sow chaos to undermine and overthrow certain governments that don't align necessarily with interests of the United States, right? In this case, my lasting impression is that these same entities who basically fabricate scenarios that result in riots and the overthrowing of governments in third world countries in Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East were attempting to do it to Donald Trump because they did not like his foreign policy. And Jim Comey himself last week suggested that he opened an investigation into Trump because he did not like his foreign policy regarding Russia. So the lasting impression I have about this saga, and it's probably going to shock me even more when other people's involvements are disclosed, is that this was truly a soft coup attempt against the president that was manufactured by the CIA, by the FBI, by MI6, Australian intelligence as well, to undermine Trump and hopefully, cause enough hysteria to impeach him. But unfortunately for them, I think Donald Trump is he's a big fighter. He was fighting them tooth and nail. There was no real evidence that could hold up in court or even in the court of public opinion, suggesting that anyone was working with Russians. And that's why he ended up defeating them, and why this is probably going to go down in history as a failed coup attempt that not only the president survived, but it was emboldened because of, and I guarantee you he's going to win in 2020, and it might end up changing U.S. Law eventually. I don't know to what extent it will, but certainly the oversight of the CIA and the FBI is going to be under, scrutiny moving forward, and you might see dramatic changes to how they're able to operate moving forward because of this failed coup attempt. And that's my true conviction, and I could be wrong, but I don't think I'm going to be wrong as the story unfolds.
No, and even, this is something that I've talked about a lot, but even after Comey was fired in May 2017, Andrew McCabe launched this separate investigation on Trump on the basis of him believing, meaning McCabe believing, that Trump could be serving the interests of Russia. So essentially they were criminalizing foreign policy differences. That's kind of what this distills into.
That's exactly what I just said. There's a reason that George Papadopoulos was targeted with FARA violations because his policies with the Israelis differentiated and differed from the Obama administration. Michael Flynn was targeted with FARA violations. Manafort was targeted with FARA violations, and even possibly Carter Page. Well, they never charged him, but that's a different topic. There's a reason that the guys caught up in this bizarre probe were all criminally charged with FARA violations, and McCabe and Comey targeted Trump for his foreign policy opinion on Russia. I don't think these are disparate events. These are not disparate cases. I think this is what the entire case was all about. It was targeting people who had opinions and connections and were in positions of power that could influence U.S. foreign policy in a manner which the CIA and the FBI did not want to be taken. And in my case, it was clear that my hostile views towards Turkey and my pro-Israeli views were seen as a potential threat to the CIA and MI6, and even the FBI, Michael Flynn when it came to Turkey and Russia, and Paul Manafort to Ukraine, and Donald Trump when it came to Russia. So that's what I believe.
One last thing. How do you rate the performance of the American media throughout all this? Because I rate it catastrophically poorly.
So do I. I think that the media was complicit in this PSYOP. I call it a PSYOP, and I don't use that adjective easily, and I don't want to be extreme, but I think that's the best way I could describe what we as Americans have lived the last 2 years. It's a PSYOP. And unfortunately for newspapers like the New York Times, um, I am now going public with my testimony, and the New York Times has known about this story for 2 years, yet they never reported on it. And the only reason they decided probably not to report on it and to write these fake cover stories like me drinking in a bar or something was to simplify a very, very, very ambiguous and difficult case that I was involved in, that was clearly orchestrated, and their job was to cover it up. I don't say that lightly, because I do have friends at the New York Times. I have friends at the Washington Post. I have friends in both the liberal and the conservative media. But I'm actually very disappointed in how they have both written about this story, how they have not disclosed certain elements to it, and why they were propagating the talking points of the FBI and the CIA for 2 years when all the evidence was not in their favor. We'll see moving forward, now that the Mueller report is coming out and the conclusions are out. We'll see if the New York Times and other newspapers change their tunes and they become less of the CIA, FBI, cover agencies, and maybe they'll start reporting facts the way they are. But I'll be shocked if they do, because they haven't done it for 2 years, and I think that's it's a real travesty in this country, because the journalism is supposed to be independent and shouldn't be working or not working with either side. So.
Yep. All right. Well, I'm content to leave it there. I don't know if you have any final thoughts.
Oh no, that was a great, nice conversation, and I really enjoyed it, and I think a lot of new stuff is going to be coming out soon. So happy to keep in touch, and we'll see what happens, and maybe we'll do this again.
All right, great. Thanks so much, George.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I appreciate it. Okay, have a good.
Okay, bye.
Well, there you have it. That was intense. Hope to keep the conversation with George going. As much as we covered, there is still yet more, I'm sure. Please, reminder, subscribe on Patreon. Help subsidize all this. You can contribute on PayPal. You can now subscribe to the podcast on iTunes and Stitcher. So if you feel some goodness in your heart, why not? Either way, thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.